Before European colonization, societies around the world thrived on systems of reciprocal trade, communal wealth, and sustainable economies. In Africa, gold and salt flowed through vast trade networks, not through forced labor, but through sophisticated market systems. In the Americas, indigenous tribes shared land and resources collectively, practicing a form of economy based on mutual aid rather than exploitation. And in Asia, ancient banking systems in India and China had complex credit systems established, centuries before European financial institutions took shape. But everything changed when colonial powers arrived. Colonizers disrupted traditional exchange systems to force people into a money-based economy. They seized communal land and turned it into private property, erasing indigenous traditions of shared land ownership. They imposed colonial taxes, such as Britain's infamous hut tax in Africa, that could only be paid in European currency, forcing locals into low-wage labor for survival. In British-controlled Africa, people were suddenly required to pay taxes on their own homes in British currency. The only way to obtain this money? Work for the colonizers, often under brutal conditions, for wages too low to escape poverty. This was not just economic policy, it was economic warfare. The goal was to dismantle self-sufficient societies and make them dependent on colonial economies. Colonialism wasn't just about conquest, it was about profit. The exploitation of land and labor fueled the rise of global capitalism. They enslaved millions of people to work in plantations across the Americas. They drained Africa, India, and the Americas of precious resources, gold, silver, diamonds, spices, sugar, and cotton. They flooded local markets with European goods to destroy indigenous industries and make colonies economically dependent. The British destruction of India's textile industry. The British banned Indian cotton exports despite Indian textiles being vastly superior to British ones. And they forced Indian consumers to buy British-made fabrics. They crushed local textile production, leaving millions unemployed and deepening India's dependency on Britain. Colonial corporations, like the British East India Company, functioned as private governments, controlling entire economies, imposing taxes, and even commanding armies. By the 19th century, European colonial powers had perfected a new tool for control: debt. They forced colonies to take massive loans from European banks for development, kept ex-colonies in permanent debt, ensuring they would have to sell resources cheaply. They used modern institutions like the IMF and World Bank to dictate the economic policies of newly independent nations. Africa's debt crisis. Many African and Latin American countries are still paying off debts inherited from colonial rule. These debts, imposed by international banks, ensure that wealth continues flowing toward the global north. This was a deliberate strategy. By keeping these nations in debt, Western economies ensured a constant supply of cheap labor and raw materials. But capitalism wasn't just about economics, it was about controlling minds. The shift from community-based economies to corporate capitalism redefined success and self-worth. They destroyed self-sufficient economies, making people reliant on wages, replaced spiritual and cultural values with consumerism, created a scarcity mindset, making people believe that endless labor was necessary for survival. Modern labor exploitation in the United States. Today, workers in wealthy capitalist nations like the United States work longer hours than medieval peasants, yet many still struggle with debt and basic needs. Capitalism thrives on artificial scarcity. It keeps people working, consuming, and competing instead of cooperating. Who controls this global system? The same elite families and secret societies that built colonial empires. They keep people distracted with meaningless political fights while they control both sides. Tehi ensure that basic needs like housing, healthcare, and education remain expensive. They manipulate global markets to maintain wealth at the top. The 2008 financial crisis. The crash wasn't an accident, it was a wealth transfer from the middle class to the ultra-rich. Banks were bailed out while ordinary people lost their homes. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's financial history. The elite have always used capitalism as a tool of control. Colonialism and slavery never ended. They evolved into capitalism. Debt, monopolies, and economic inequality are just new forms of control. The same elite families still profit while everyone else struggles. There are alternative systems, but those in power work hard to suppress them. The first step to liberation is understanding history. By reclaiming decentralized economies, fostering community wealth, and reintroducing barter systems, we can begin to undo the damage of colonial capitalism. The future doesn't belong to the corporations. It belongs to us.